an engine so popular it outsold factory offerings. Yet Chevrolet never built a single one. The 383 stroker wasn't born in a corporate engineering department or unveiled at a press conference. It emerged from junkyards and garage floors across America in the 1970s, created by hot rodders who refused to accept that the muscle car era was over. No marketing campaign, no official designation, just a brilliant combination of salvaged parts that delivered more power than engines costing twice as much. For over 50 years, the 383 has been the small block Chevy that enthusiasts choose when they want torque, affordability, and that unmistakable pushrod V8 rumble. It's assembled from a 350 block and a 400 crankshaft, two engines GM actually built, combined in a way the factory never intended. Today, you can buy complete 383-stroker crate engines from Chevrolet Performance themselves. So how did a junkyard Frankenstein become so legendary that the manufacturer started selling it? Historical context and development. Nobody knows exactly who built the first 383-stroker. There's no patent, no famous builder who can claim credit. It simply appeared in the early 1970s when resourceful engine builders faced a problem. Chevrolet's 400 cubic inch small block was plagued by chronic overheating. The 4.125-inch bore left cylinder walls dangerously thin, what's called a Siamese bore design, where adjacent cylinders shared cooling passages. Push the power, and it would overheat, crack, or both. But that 400 had something valuable. A 3,750-inch stroke crankshaft compared to the 350's 3,480-inch stroke. Meanwhile, the 350 small block, introduced in 1968, had robust 4,000-inch bore cylinder walls and a bulletproof reputation. Some anonymous genius, or maybe several working independently, realized you could machine a 350 block to accept the 400's longer stroke crank. Bore the 350 cylinders .030-inch oversize for cleanup, install the 400 crank with proper clearancing, and you'd have 383 cubic inches without the 400's heat problems. Engine builders had been stroking engines since the 1960s, stuffing 283 cranks into 327 blocks, and 4-inch stroke cranks into Pontiac 389s. The practice wasn't new, but the 383 combination was special because by the mid-1970s, both 350 and 400 engines were everywhere. Junkyards overflowed with them. The earliest documented 383 builds date to around 1971, though it likely happened even earlier. The Golden Age. By the 1980s and 1990s, the 383 stroker became the standard small block build. Every performance catalog, Summit Racing, Jegs, Edelbrock, offered complete stroker kits. The appeal was undeniable. Add 33 cubic inches to a 350 for virtually the same cost as a standard rebuild. Why build a 350 when you could build a 383? The recipe was simple. Start with any 350 block, 2-bolt or 4-bolt mains. Didn't matter much for street use. Bore it .030-inch oversize to 4.030 inches. Machine the block to clearance the longer stroke. Install a modified 400 crankshaft with 3.750-inch stroke. Add 5.700-inch connecting rods and custom pistons calculated for your desired compression ratio. The math worked out to 382.6 cubic inches, rounded to 383. Power numbers were impressive for the cost. A typical street 383 with aluminum heads, hydraulic roller cam, and proper carburation made 400 to 450 horsepower and 420 to 460 pound-feet of torque. But the real magic was where that torque lived. Peak torque arrived between 3,000 and 5,000 RPM, exactly where you needed it for street driving. The increased piston speed meant a 383 at 2,500 RPM had the same piston velocity as a 350 at 3,100 RPM, improving combustion efficiency and throttle response. The 383 dominated because it transformed everyday driving. That extra torque meant you could run taller rear gears, 3.08 to 1 instead of 4.10 to 1, for better highway cruising and fuel economy while still pulling hard off the line. Trucks became tow monsters. Camaros and Chevrolets embarrassed big blocks at stoplights. Even mild 383 builds with 9-to-1 compression felt stronger than hot-rodded 350s. The cult following grew exponentially. Best small-block Chevy combination became gospel among enthusiasts, repeated in magazine tech articles and garage conversations. Street rodders building 1932 Fords almost universally chose 383s. S10 mini-trucks got 383 swaps for devastating sleeper status. Drag racers found the affordable torque perfect for bracket racing. Complete stroker kits ranged from $499 budget specials with cast cranks and hyper-eutectic pistons to $2,500 forged rotating assemblies for serious power. For many builders, the 383 represented automotive democracy, serious performance available to anyone with basic tools and determination, not just those with deep pockets. Technical brilliance. The 383's genius lies in fundamental physics. Longer stroke equals more displacement, more leverage, and more torque. The bore and stroke of 4.030 inches by 3.750 inches delivered 383 cubic inches compared to the 350's 4.000 by 3.480. Those extra 0.270 inches of stroke created three distinct advantages. First, the longer stroke gave combustion pressure a longer leverage arm acting on the crankshaft, like using a longer wrench for more torque. Second, the additional 33 cubic inches burned more air and fuel per revolution, generating more power. Third, higher piston speeds enhanced volumetric efficiency. The piston moved faster through its stroke, creating stronger intake pulses that pulled more air-fuel mixture into the cylinders and expelled exhaust more efficiently. Building a 383 required careful machine work. The 350 block needed clearancing, where the connecting rods would travel at the bottom of their stroke, otherwise they'd smack the block and destroy the engine instantly. Crankshaft choices included affordable cast-iron versions at $175 to $300, or forged steel cranks for $400 to $700 that could withstand serious abuse. Rod length sparked endless debate. Stock 5.700-inch rods from the 350 worked fine, but some builders preferred 6.000-inch rods to reduce rod angularity and side loading on pistons. Compression ratios typically ranged from 9.0 to 1 for pump gas to 10.5 to 1 for performance, achieved by matching piston dish to cylinder head chamber size. Challenges rise. The 383 concept itself was nearly flawless, but execution separated successful builds from expensive failures. The biggest issue was knowledge. Many backyard builders didn't understand the critical importance of balancing. The 400 crankshaft was externally balanced, requiring specific offset weights on the flex plate or flywheel. Install the wrong one and the engine would vibrate itself to pieces. Clearancing mistakes were common and catastrophic. Builders who didn't properly machine the block for increased rod throw would assemble the engine, fire it up, and hear a horrific bang as connecting rods contacted the block at bottom dead center. Instant grenade. Proper clearancing wasn't difficult, but it required knowledge and the right measurements. Compression ratio confusion created problems too. Combining the wrong pistons with the wrong cylinder heads resulted in either dangerously high compression that caused detonation or uselessly low compression that killed power. Two-piece rear main seal engines from pre-1986 blocks were notorious for oil leaks if the seal wasn't installed with perfect precision. As the 1990s progressed, finding good 350 cores became harder. Junkyards were picked clean of affordable small blocks. Used 400 crankshafts grew scarce as those engines disappeared from salvage yards. Then in 1997, GM introduced the LS engine family. Aluminum construction, more power per cubic inch, modern technology. The 383 suddenly faced legitimate competition from within the Chevy family. But the aftermarket responded. By the early 2000s, companies offered brand new cast crankshafts for under $200. The junkyard hunt was over. You could build a complete 383 with all new parts. The transition. The aftermarket's embrace of the 383 transformed it from junkyard special to legitimate product line. Complete rotating assembly kits, crank, rods, pistons, rings, bearings, sold for $499 and up. No scrounging required. Eagle, Scat, and Manley became household names among engine builders, each offering multiple 383 configurations for different power levels and budgets. Then something remarkable happened. Chevrolet Performance started selling factory 383 stroker crate engines. The company that never built a 383 in production vehicles now offered them over the counter. The SP383 Deluxe produced 435 horsepower and 445 pound-feet of torque, featured aluminum cylinder heads based on the fast burn design, and came with a warranty. Price, around $7,000 complete. Modern 383 crate engines incorporated technology unimaginable in the 1970s. Hydraulic roller camshafts eliminated valve adjustments. Sequential port fuel injection replaced carburetors for improved fuel economy and drivability. Computer-controlled ignition optimized timing. Some builders even offered complete turnkey engines with wiring harnesses and ECUs, just bolted in and drive. Yet despite the LS engine's arrival in 1997 with its aluminum construction, modern port designs, and impressive power-to-weight ratio, the 383 refused to die. It remained cheaper than LS swaps, fit in anything that held a small block, and maintained compatibility with decades of aftermarket parts. The beauty was in the options. Build it mild for daily driving with 9-to-1 compression and a gentle cam, or build it wild with forged internals and boost. Budget builds came in under $3,500 using refurbished cores. Premium builds with all forged components pushed $7,000. Either way, you got proven performance. From junkyard ingenuity to showroom respectability, the 383 had arrived and it wasn't going anywhere. Legacy and modern reality. Walk into any performance parts store today and you'll find dozens of 383 configurations. Blueprint Engines 383 produces 436 horsepower and 443 pound-feet for $5,749. Prestige Motorsports offers a supercharged version making over 600 horsepower. 50 years after its mysterious origins, the 383 stroker thrives. It remains one of the cheapest paths to 400-plus horsepower V8 power. The massive aftermarket means literally thousands of compatible parts from dozens of manufacturers. You can build a 383 using a brand new block or a crusty core from 1975, cast or forged internals, carburetor or fuel injection, distributor or coil on plug. The flexibility is unmatched. The LS versus 383 debate rages on. LS engines are lighter, more efficient, and make impressive power. But a 383 costs less to build, sounds like a traditional American V8, and doesn't require expensive swap mounts and electronics. For purists, it's the best of both worlds. Traditional small block architecture with modern performance. Current applications span the automotive spectrum: street rods, muscle car resto mods, off-road rock crawlers, drag cars, and pickup trucks. It's one of the last engines a home builder can assemble in a garage without specialized equipment. The 383 teaches fundamental engine building, bore, stroke, displacement, compression, principles that apply to any internal combustion engine. After 5 decades, there's no sign of the 383 fading. It stands as proof that sometimes the best engineering comes not from corporate research departments, but from resourceful people with dirty hands and brilliant ideas. The engine GM never built became the engine everyone wanted. Hot rodders took 2 production engines and created something better than either one alone. More reliable than the 400, more powerful than the 350. That's the true American hot rod spirit. Take what you've got, make it better, and never accept that the party's over. The 383 didn't just survive the LS revolution, it thrived alongside it, proving there's room for both old-school torque and modern technology. Could any modern engine match 50 years of grassroots perfection? When was the last time hot rodders improved on factory engineering so decisively that the manufacturer started copying them? The 383 proves that sometimes the best innovations don't come from billion-dollar R&D budgets. They come from garages, from necessity, from people who simply refuse to accept limitations. Hit subscribe for more stories of engines built by the people, for the people, because the best engineering legends aren't always written by corporations. In 1967, Chevrolet built an engine that broke every muscle car rule. While Detroit chased cubic inches and low-end torque, this 302 cubic inch V8 spun to 7,000 RPM and made power where American engines weren't supposed to at the top of the tachometer. The Chevy 302DZ, never meant for street domination, built for one singular purpose: beat Ford at Trans Am racing. Only produced from 1967 to 1969. 3 years, just over 28,000 engines built, then gone forever. Chevrolet rated it conservatively at 290 horsepower. The reality? Over 350 horsepower, with 376 possible when properly tuned. This wasn't brute force. This was precision engineering. A parts bin special, combining a 327 block with a 283 crankshaft to create something entirely new. It won back-to-back Trans Am championships in 1968 and 1969. Mark Donohue drove it to victory. Dave Strickler took an IHRA Superstock World title. The 302 proved that American V8s could do more than just make tire smoke. Here's the mystery that divided enthusiasts. Why would Chevrolet build a smaller, higher-revving engine when big block power dominated the streets? Why chase RPM when cubic inches were king? The answer reveals everything about racing innovation and the legend that refuses to die. Historical context and development. The story begins with corporate politics and racing ambition. In 1963, General Motors banned all factory-supported racing programs. But by 1966, watching Ford and Chrysler collect Trans Am publicity while GM sat idle became unbearable. Management saw dollar signs. The racing ban quietly disappeared for 1967. The SCCA Trans-American Sedan Championship had one critical rule: maximum displacement of 305 cubic inches, exactly 5.0 liters. Chevrolet needed a homologation special to race the new Camaro against Ford's Mustang domination. Enter Vince Piggins, Chevrolet's performance executive who envisioned a race-ready Camaro customers could buy off showroom floors. The engineering team faced a mathematical problem. How do you create 305 cubic inches from existing components without expensive new tooling? The solution was brilliantly simple: raid the parts bin. Take the 327 small block with its 4.00-inch bore. Grab the forged steel crankshaft from the 283 with its 3.00-inch stroke. Combine them, and you get exactly 302.4 cubic inches, just under the Trans Am limit. This over-square design, where bore exceeds stroke, was American heresy. Muscle cars made power through long strokes and low-end torque. The 302 flipped that formula. Short stroke meant high RPM capability. Big bore meant breathing room. This engine would spin, not lug. The first 302s arrived in 1967 with engine codes MO for standard versions and MP for those with AIR emissions equipment. Small journal blocks used 2.30-inch main bearings. Casting number 3892657 identified these rare first-year engines. The Z/28 RPO code was created purely for homologation. Chevrolet barely advertised it existed. The Golden Age. The 302 hit Trans Am racing like a sledgehammer. In 1968, Mark Donohue, piloting a Penske-prepared Z/28 Camaro, secured the manufacturer's championship for Chevrolet. Ford's Boss, 302 Mustangs, AMC Javelins, and every other competitor watched Chevrolet's giant killer dominate road courses where handling and high RPM power mattered more than straight-line muscle. The championship repeated in 1969, back-to-back victories that cemented the 302's racing credentials. Dave Strickler took the 302 to IHRA Superstock glory in 1968, proving this road racing engine could win on drag strips too. The Z/28 Camaro became the thinking man's muscle car, requiring skill and RPM management rather than just mashing the throttle. The engine's reputation spread through underground racing circles and magazine features. Hot Rod magazine tested Z28s and discovered the truth behind Chevrolet's conservative ratings. Road and Track praised the handling balance while noting the engine required commitment. You couldn't drive it lazily. Car and Driver called it the best handling passenger car ever built in the United States, crediting the 302's power delivery for maintaining chassis balance through corners. The engine became a badge of honor among serious drivers who understood that peak horsepower mattered less than where that power arrived. Street racers discovered the 302 destroyed bigger engines on twisty roads where cubic inches couldn't compensate for momentum and driver skill. Street buyers who ordered the Z/28 package got more than just an engine. Heavy-duty cooling hardware, stiffened suspension, front disc brakes, and deep-groove pulleys prepared the Camaro for serious driving. The close ratio M21 Muncie 4-speed was mandatory. No automatics offered because this engine needed a driver, not a passenger. The optional tachometer displayed 8,000 RPM, a statement of intent that separated this Camaro from boulevard cruisers. Chevrolet officially rated the 302 at 290 horsepower at 5,800 RPM and 290 pound-feet of torque at 4,200 RPM. Insurance-friendly numbers that kept premiums manageable for young buyers. The reality was far different. Many Z28s shipped with tubular headers in the trunk, a wink-wink acknowledgement that proper exhaust unleashed hidden power. With headers installed, carburetor properly jetted, and ignition timing optimized, owners discovered 376 horsepower was achievable. Race engines with dual quad carburetors reached 465 horsepower. But this wasn't stoplight royalty. The 302 required RPM to wake up. Below 3,500 RPM, it felt sluggish. Above 4,000 RPM, it came alive. At 6,500 RPM, it screamed. Technical brilliance. The 302's engineering was a masterclass in high RPM design. At its core sat 302.4 cubic inches, created by that 4.00-inch bore and 3.00-inch stroke combination. Compression measured an aggressive 11.0 to 1, demanding premium fuel but extracting maximum energy from every combustion event. The factory redline was 7,000 RPM, but properly built examples safely exceeded 8,000 RPM. The rotating assembly was race-grade from the factory. That forged steel 283 crankshaft weighed less than cast-iron alternatives while handling far more stress. Forged steel connecting rods measured 5.7 inches, shot-peened after 1968 to relieve internal stresses through controlled surface deformation. Forged aluminum pistons with floating pins reduced reciprocating mass. The rod ratio of 1.753 to 1 was nearly ideal for high RPM operation, reducing side loading on cylinder walls. The cylinder heads told the performance story. Camel hump, or Fuely castings, numbered 186, featured 2.02-inch intake valves and 1.60-inch exhaust valves, large for the era. Combustion chambers measured 61 to 64 cubic centimeters. Screw-in rocker studs and guide plates prevented valve train instability at high RPM. This wasn't economy car hardware. The camshaft was legendary. The Duntov 3030 solid lifter grind. Mechanical lifters eliminated valve float that plagued hydraulic designs at high RPM. Lift measured 0.485 inches on both intake and exhaust. Duration ran 229 degrees intake, 237 degrees exhaust. Overlap at zero lift was 78 degrees, radical for street use, perfect for racing. Fuel delivery came through a high-rise aluminum dual-plane intake manifold topped with a Holley 4,154-barrel carburetor. Early cars got 800 CFM versions. 1969 models received 780 CFM units. The optional cross-ram intake mounted two 585 CFM Holleys on individual plenums. Exotic appearance, 25 additional horsepower. Challenges rise. The 302's racing brilliance created street frustration. This wasn't an engine for casual drivers. Below 4,000 RPM, it felt disappointingly mild, less torque than a typical 327, nowhere near the grunt of big blocks. The engine demanded to be revved, required steep rear gears like 4.10 to 1 or numerically higher ratios, and needed drivers willing to shift frequently and run high RPM. The real killer was insurance companies. By 1970, anything rated over 300 horsepower triggered premium increases that young buyers couldn't afford. The 302's conservative 290 horsepower rating helped, but insurance agents weren't stupid. They knew Z/28 Camaros were performance machines. Corporate priorities shifted with the redesigned second-generation Camaro for 1970. The Z/28 received the LT-1350, producing 360 horsepower with far better street manners, more low-end torque, available with automatic transmission, easier to drive daily. The 302 was discontinued after just 3 model years. Total production reached approximately 28,000 engines, installed exclusively in Z/28 Camaros. No Corvettes, no Chevelle, no other applications. Purpose-built, race-focused, and commercially impractical for mass production. Legacy and modern reality. Today, authentic DZ302 engines command $15,000 to $25,000, depending on condition and provenance. Complete Z28 Camaros with original 302s sell from $46,800 in fair condition to $145,000 for concours quality examples. The one-off 1968 Z/28 convertible is essentially priceless, a factory experiment that never reached production. Authentication is critical because fakes proliferate. The DZ engine pad stamping is frequently forged on common 350 blocks. Verification requires correct casting numbers, matching suffix codes, and internal measurements confirming bore and stroke. Collectors spend thousands on expert inspections because authentic DZ302 engines add massive value to Camaros. The parts bin's special nature means replicas are easily built. All original components remain available through aftermarket suppliers. Remanufactured DZ302 engines sell for $12,995 to $16,995. Expensive but accessible for enthusiasts wanting the experience without six-figure investment. Modern builders achieve 500-plus horsepower and 8,000 RPM capability with upgraded components while maintaining period-correct appearance. Period testing revealed Chevrolet's conservative ratings masked real performance. The advertised 290 horsepower was insurance strategy. Actual output measured 350 to 376 horsepower, depending on tune and exhaust. Motor Trend built an exact replica using period-correct specifications and recorded 357 horsepower at 6,700 RPM, confirming decades of enthusiast claims that factory ratings were deliberately understated. Modern performance parts transformed the 302 further. Aftermarket aluminum heads flow dramatically better than original castings. Modern camshaft profiles optimize power delivery. Electronic fuel injection provides precise mixture control. The fundamental architecture, over square bore and stroke forged internals, lightweight rotating assembly, remains brilliant for high RPM operation. The 302 proved American engines could rev. It demonstrated that displacement wasn't everything. It created a template for future high-performance small blocks. And it produced an unforgettable sound, a high-pitched wail completely unlike typical American V8 rumble. 3 years, one purpose, pure rebellion. The Chevy 302 proved that American V8s could spin, not just grunt. It won championships, shattered assumptions, and created a legend that refuses to fade. The muscle car world's greatest high-revving heretic. Subscribe for more engine legends. An engine so powerful it ruled drag strips with an iron fist, then spent 3 decades hauling boats, campers, and tons of cargo without complaint. Or wasn't designed for longevity. It was built to annihilate quarter miles and embarrass every competitor in 1970. With 450 horsepower and 500 pound-feet of torque, it became the highest-rated production engine ever offered by an American manufacturer. But then something unexpected happened. This fire-breathing beast transformed into one of the most reliable, longest-lived engines in automotive history. From 1970 until 2001, the 454 powered everything from legendary Chevrolet Super Sports to heavy-duty pickups, Suburbans towing fifth wheels, and motorhomes crossing the continent. It outlasted Ford's 460, Chrysler's 440, and every other competitor's big block by years. The formula was simple: 7.4 liters of cast-iron fury, pushrod simplicity, and displacement that made problems disappear. So how did an engine designed for 2-year glory runs end up working faithfully for 3 decades? Historical context and development. The late 1960s were a strange time in Detroit. General Motors executives feared government antitrust actions. Their market share was pushing 50%. So they'd implemented a corporate policy limiting intermediate-sized cars to engines under 400 cubic inches. This neutered their muscle car lineup while Ford and Chrysler stuffed whatever they wanted under their hoods. But 1970 changed everything. GM lifted the ban and the horsepower floodgates opened. Chevrolet's answer was to take their legendary 427 cubic inch Mark IV big block and make it bigger. The Mark IV designation meant this was the 4th evolution of Chevy's big block lineage, tracing roots back to the 348 and 409 W Series engines of the late 1950s. Engineers at the Tonawanda, New York engine plant bored the cylinders from 4.094 inches to 4.25 inches and stretched the stroke from 3.76 inches to an even 4.00 inches. The result? 454 cubic inches of displacement, 7.4 liters in modern terms. The timing was both perfect and tragic. This was the last year before the Clean Air Act, before skyrocketing insurance rates, before fuel crises would make big blocks politically incorrect. Chevrolet knew they had one shot to make a statement. They built 2 versions: the LS5 with hydraulic lifters producing 360 horsepower aimed at luxury cars and cruisers, and the LS6, a solid lifter monster rated at 450 horsepower that would become automotive legend. The mission was simple: give customers a single engine that could replace 2 smaller ones. Why run two 3,000 horsepower engines when one 6,000 horsepower engine would do? Wait, wrong story. Why run dual 4 barrels when one massive Holly could feed all 454 inches? The 1970 model year launched with the 454 in the Corvette, Chevelle SS, El Camino, and Monte Carlo. The golden age of cubic inches had arrived. The golden age. Let's talk about the LS6, because this is where legends are made. 450 horsepower at 5,600 revolutions per minute. 500 pound-feet of torque at 3,600 revolutions per minute. These were the highest factory ratings ever stamped on an American production engine. And here's the dirty little secret every gearhead knows. Those numbers were underrated. Most experts believe actual output was north of 465 horsepower gross. Chevrolet played the same game everyone did. Sandbagged the ratings to keep insurance companies and regulators happy. The engineering was serious business. The LS6 block featured 4-bolt main bearing caps for rigidity. The crankshaft was forged steel, not cast iron. Connecting rods were forged. Pistons were forged aluminum capable of withstanding the engine's brutal 11.25-to-1 compression ratio. This wasn't a parts bin special. This was a purpose-built weapon. An 800 cubic feet per minute Holley 4-barrel carburetor sat atop an aluminum intake manifold, gulping air and fuel with abandon. Deep groove accessory pulleys allowed the LS6 to safely rev to 6,500 RPM, stratospheric for a big block in 1970. The star of the show was the 1970 Chevelle SS 454. Ordering one wasn't cheap. The Z15 SS 454 package cost $503.45 and included the milder LS5 engine as standard. Checking the LS6 option added another $263.30. The Rock Crusher M22 close ratio 4-speed was $221.80 more. By the time you added cowl induction hood, power disc brakes, and a few comfort options, you were pushing $5,000, nearly double the base price of $2,809. In $1970, that was Corvette money for a mid-size coupe. But what you got was dominance. Magazine tests showed 0 to 60 in 6 seconds flat. Quarter-mile times dipped into the high 13ths at over 100 miles per hour, and that was with factory street tires and cautious journalists. Street racers with slicks and attitude regularly cracked into the 12 seconds. The 1970 Chevelle SS 454 LS6 became the measuring stick by which all other muscle cars were judged. Tonawanda built 4,475 LS6 engines that year for Chevelle, El Caminos, and a handful of convertibles. Nobody knows the exact split because GM lost most production records decades ago. Technical brilliance. What made the 454 special wasn't exotic technology. It was the brutal effectiveness of American engineering philosophy. 454 cubic inches, 7.4 liters, bore and stroke of 4.25 inches by 4.00 inches, an over-square design that favored torque production, which made sense for an engine destined to pull weight. The block and cylinder heads were cast iron, giving the complete engine a curb weight of approximately 685 pounds. That's nearly 300 pounds heavier than a modern LS engine, but strength and durability came standard. The firing order was 1-8-4-3-6-5-7-2, creating an exhaust note that hot rodders still try to replicate today. Inside, the LS6 used components that wouldn't look out of place in a race engine. Solid lifters required valve adjustments but allowed aggressive cam profiles and high RPM operation. The LS5, aimed at the broader market, used hydraulic lifters with a Rochester Quadrajet carburetor on a cast-iron intake manifold. Still good for 360 horsepower, but with better street manners. Buyers could spec rear axle ratios from a highway-friendly 3.31-to-1 up to a drag strip-ready 4.10-to-1. Positraction limited slip differential, was a $42 option that most performance buyers checked. The cowl induction system on the Chevelle used a vacuum-operated door at the rear of the hood, opening under full throttle to feed cool air from the high-pressure area at the windshield base. It looked intimidating and actually worked. Starting in 1970, Chevrolet moved to externally balanced crankshafts, which meant specific harmonic balancers and flex plates with 33 ounce-inches of offset weight. Later, Gen V engines increased this to 42.5 ounce-inches. This is critical for anyone swapping or rebuilding. Mix up internal and external balance components and you'll shake the engine to pieces. But here's the beauty. Despite decades of evolution, a 1974 54 block can accept 1990s Vortec heads. The interchangeability keeps these engines alive and thriving. Challenges rise. The 1971 model year brought the first signs of trouble. Insurance companies had noticed that kids were buying high-horsepower cars and wrapping them around trees. Premiums for performance vehicles skyrocketed, sometimes tripling for young drivers. Chevrolet responded by lowering compression ratios. The LS5 dropped from 10.25 to 8.5 to 1, allowing it to run on regular unleaded fuel instead of demanding premium. Horsepower actually increased slightly to 365, but it peaked 600 RPM lower. The engine was being neutered. The LS6 was announced for 1971 at 425 horsepower with 9.0 to 1 compression. Chevrolet built 14 of them. Then they canceled the program. The combination of insurance costs, impending emissions regulations, and changing public attitudes killed the program. By 1972, only the LS5 remained, now rated at 270 horsepower under the new SAE net measurement system. Net ratings measured power at the flywheel with all accessories attached. A more honest number, but it looked terrible in advertisements. The 1973 LS4 was the last gasp of performance. 275 net horsepower. It went into a handful of Corvettes and Chevelle Lagunas, then disappeared forever. The first fuel crisis hit that fall, and suddenly nobody wanted to buy gas-guzzling big blocks. By 1974, the 454 was the same across every application. 235 to 270 horsepower depending on configuration, with emphasis shifted entirely to low-end torque and reliability. The Corvette dropped the 454 after 1974. Full-size Impalas and Caprices kept it through 1976. Then it was gone from passenger cars entirely. The transition. Through the 1980s, the carbureted 454 soldiered on in trucks with minimal changes. Output hovered around 230 to 245 horsepower, which doesn't sound like much until you factor in the 400-plus pound-feet of torque arriving at low RPM. This was an engine designed to work, not impress anyone at a stoplight. Everything changed in 1987. Chevrolet introduced electronic fuel injection on the 454, creating the L19 variant. Sequential port fuel injection replaced carburetors, controlled by an ECU that could adjust fueling based on dozens of sensor inputs. The 454 EFI made 230 horsepower in most applications, though some versions reached 255 horsepower. More importantly, it started reliably in cold weather, idled smoothly, and delivered better fuel economy than carbureted versions. Though better is relative when discussing a 7.4-liter truck engine. The most exciting L19 application arrived in 1990, the 454 SS pickup. This was Chevrolet's factory hot rod, a half-ton short bed powered by the big block. The 1990 model made 230 horsepower through a single 3-inch catalytic converter. But 1991 through 1993 models received dual 2.5-inch catalytic converters and jumped to 255 horsepower at 4,000 RPM with 405 pound-feet at 2,400 revolutions per minute. sport suspension, bucket seats, and aggressive styling made it the spiritual successor to the muscle trucks of old. Legacy and modern reality. But the 454 never really died. Chevrolet Performance still sells 454 crate engines today, a modern the most successful engine in automotive history. The Chevrolet 350 small block V8 didn't just power cars, it powered an entire culture, a movement, and 4 generations of enthusiasts who turned wrenches in garages across America. From 1967 to 2003, and continuing today as a crate engine, the 350 became more than just an engine. It became a religion. Introduced in the 1967 Camaro, the 350 cubic inch V8 quickly became Chevrolet's most versatile power plant. Installed in everything from Corvettes to station wagons, Camaros to pickup trucks, and even boats, industrial equipment, and highly modified aircraft. With its perfect balance of power, reliability, and modification potential, the 350 became the default choice for anyone who needed a V8 engine for any purpose. But the numbers tell only part of the story. Over its production run, millions of 350s were built, making it the most widely produced V8 engine in history. Yet what truly made the 350 legendary wasn't just how many were built. It was what happened after they left the factory. The 350 became the foundation of the hot rod industry, the backbone of engine swap culture, and the reason Chevy 350 became synonymous with American performance itself. This is the engine that made LS swap a verb decades before LS engines existed. The 350 that powered a Wisconsin businessman's C1500 pickup to over 1 million miles. The engine that could be built to produce 145 horsepower for Grandma's station wagon or 370 horsepower for a Corvette from the same basic architecture. This is the story of automotive immortality. Historical context and development. The 350's story begins with Ed Cole's revolutionary 1955 small block Chevy, the 265 cubic inch V8 that changed everything. Lightweight, compact, and powerful, Cole's design established the architectural template that would dominate American performance for 5 decades. By 1957, displacement grew to 283 cubic inches, and with mechanical fuel injection, it became one of the first production engines to achieve 1 horsepower per cubic inch. The 327 followed in 1962, pushing displacement further while refining the design. But Chevrolet needed something between the 327 and the big block 396, an engine that could deliver V8 torque and power in a package compatible with all their vehicle platforms. The answer came in 1967 when engineers created the 350 by combining proven components in a new configuration. The 350 used the 327's 4.00-inch bore, but paired it with a new crankshaft featuring a 3.48-inch stroke. Longer than the 327's 3.25-inch throw, but shorter than big block dimensions. This over-square design promoted good breathing and high RPM capability, while the longer stroke increased torque production. The result was nearly perfect. 350 cubic inches of displacement in the same compact package that had made the small block Chevy famous. The first 350, designated L48, produced 295 horsepower and 380 pound-feet of torque when it debuted in the 1967 Camaro. But Chevrolet immediately recognized they'd created something special. The 350's combination of adequate power, compact dimensions, and parts commonality with other small blocks made it perfect for widespread application. By 1968, it appeared in the Nova, and by 1969, it replaced the 327 as the base engine in the Corvette. The Golden Age. The 350's golden age came in two distinct waves. The first wave, from 1967 to 1971, represented the muscle car era's pinnacle. The legendary LT1 version, introduced in 1970, produced 370 horsepower in the Corvette and 360 in the Camaro Z/28, with 11-to-1 compression, solid lifters, big valve heads, and a 780 cubic feet per minute Holley carburetor. This was the 350 at its absolute performance peak, a small block that could run with big blocks and win. But the 350's real genius was its versatility. Chevrolet offered the same basic engine in configurations ranging from mild two-barrel versions for family cars to high-performance variants for sports cars. The L46 produced 350 horsepower, while more pedestrian versions made 250 to 295 horsepower. Every application used the same fundamental architecture, making parts interchangeable and keeping costs manageable. Then came the dark years. Emissions regulations, fuel crises, and the switch to net horsepower ratings devastated the 350's performance. By 1975, the L48 350 in Corvettes produced a pathetic 165 horsepower. The engine that had made 370 horsepower 5 years earlier was neutered by emissions equipment, lower compression ratios, and restrictive intake and exhaust systems. Critics wrote obituaries for performance engines, declaring the muscle car era dead, but the 350 refused to die. The second golden age came in the 1980s and 1990s as electronic fuel injection and computer controls unlocked new potential. The L98, with tuned port injection, produced 245 horsepower by 1991. The Generation 2 LT1, introduced in 1992, brought reverse flow cooling, aluminum heads, and 300 horsepower, proving the old architecture still had life. Technical brilliance. The Chevrolet 350's technical brilliance lay in its fundamental architecture rather than exotic features. The cast-iron block with 4.40-inch bore spacing created a compact, rigid structure that could accommodate various bore and stroke combinations. The 90-degree V-angle balanced primary forces while keeping the engine narrow enough for tight engine bays. 5 main bearings with 2.45-inch journals after 1968 provided robust crankshaft support. The 350's over-square design, 4.00-inch bore with 3.48-inch stroke, was nearly perfect for both performance and everyday use. The large bore allowed generous valve sizes and efficient combustion chamber design, while the moderate stroke kept piston speeds reasonable at high RPM. This geometry made the 350 equally capable as a 5,000 RPM street engine or a 7,000 RPM race motor with appropriate modifications. The engine's true genius was its modularity. Chevrolet designed the 350 to share components across the entire small block family. Connecting rods, pistons, cylinder heads, intake manifolds, and accessory drives were largely interchangeable between different displacements. This parts commonality meant massive economies of scale in production and created an aftermarket ecosystem unlike anything in automotive history. Generation 2 improvements in 1992 brought reverse flow cooling that circulated coolant through cylinder heads first, allowing higher compression ratios without detonation. Computer-controlled fuel injection and ignition timing optimized performance across all operating conditions. Yet the basic architecture remained recognizable. Bore spacing, deck height, and bell housing patterns unchanged from Ed Cole's original 1955 design. The 350's adaptability extended beyond automotive applications. Marine versions powered countless boats, industrial variants ran generators and pumps, and modified examples even found their way into experimental aircraft, proving the design's fundamental soundness. Challenges rise. The 1970s nearly killed the Chevrolet 350 and every other American performance engine with it. The Clean Air Act, corporate average fuel economy standards, and insurance company surcharges on high-performance vehicles created a perfect storm that devastated the muscle car market. Compression ratios that had reached 11:1 plummeted to 8.0:1. Horsepower ratings collapsed. The LT1's 370 horsepower became a distant memory, as even Corvette 350s struggled to produce 200 horsepower. Emissions equipment strangled breathing and killed throttle response. Air pumps, catalytic converters, and exhaust gas recirculation systems added complexity while reducing power. The switch from gross to net horsepower ratings in 1972 made the decline appear even more dramatic, though net ratings were more honest about real-world performance. Fuel crises made gas-guzzling V8s politically incorrect and economically painful. Buyers fled to smaller engines and import cars that promised better fuel economy. General Motors responded by developing smaller displacement V8s like the 305, reducing the 350's role in passenger cars. By the early 1980s, the 350's future looked grim. Competition emerged from unlikely sources. Ford's 5.0-liter was gaining respectability, and import performance cars were stealing enthusiast attention. Within GM, the 350 faced challenges from new corporate engines and front-wheel drive platforms that couldn't accommodate traditional V8s. Most devastating was the perception that the 350's era had passed. Magazine articles proclaimed the death of performance, suggesting that computer-controlled four cylinders represented the future. The 350 seemed destined to fade into history as a relic of a more permissive age, remembered fondly but considered irrelevant to modern automotive needs. The transition. The 350's renaissance began in the mid-1980s as engineers learned to use electronics to unlock power while meeting emissions standards. The L98 with tuned port fuel injection demonstrated that modern technology could revive classic architecture. By eliminating carburetors and optimizing fuel delivery with computers, Chevrolet extracted more power with better efficiency and cleaner emissions. The crate engine program proved brilliant marketing and engineering. GM Performance Parts began offering complete 350 engines, the Goodwrench 350, ZZ4, and high-performance variants, that enthusiasts could bolt into any vehicle. This program kept the 350 alive in the enthusiast community, even as production vehicles transitioned to newer designs. Hot rodders discovered they could buy a brand new 350 with modern internals, warranty included, making engine swaps accessible to anyone with a credit card. The Generation 2 LT1 in 1992 represented the 350's technological peak. Reverse flow cooling, distributorless ignition, and sophisticated engine management produced 300 horsepower from the Corvette version while maintaining drivability and efficiency. The LT1 proved the old architecture could compete with overhead cam competitors when combined with modern technology. But the end was approaching. The LS1 debuted in 1997, bringing aluminum blocks, improved breathing, and better packaging to the small block formula. Production 350s gradually disappeared from GM's lineup, with the last regular production engines built in 2003. The 350 had enjoyed a 36-year production run, extraordinary by any standard. Yet the 350 never truly died. GM continues manufacturing 350 crate engines decades after production vehicle use ended. The aftermarket supports 350SS with parts rivaling new engines in sophistication, ensuring America's favorite V8 will continue powering enthusiast vehicles indefinitely. Legacy and modern impact. The Chevrolet 350 achieved something no other engine has matched: true automotive immortality. 20 years after leaving production vehicles, the 350 remains the most popular engine swap choice, the default answer when someone says, "I need a V8." Its influence extends far beyond the millions of vehicles it originally powered. The 350 created the modern hot rod industry. Companies built entire businesses around aftermarket 350 parts: cylinder heads, intake manifolds, camshafts, rotating assemblies, and complete engines. This ecosystem made building a 350 accessible to anyone, regardless of budget or skill level. You could buy a junkyard 350 for $200 and build it into a reliable 400 horsepower street engine with readily available parts and knowledge. The engine's modification potential proved nearly limitless. Stock 350 blocks routinely handle 500 to 600 horsepower with proper preparation. Aftermarket blocks push well beyond 1,000 horsepower. The same basic architecture powers everything from mild street cruisers to pro-stock drag cars, demonstrating design flexibility that few engines achieve. More importantly, the 350 democratized performance. Unlike exotic engines requiring specialized knowledge and expensive parts, the 350 could be built by ordinary enthusiasts in home garages. This accessibility created generations of hot rodders who learned engine building on Chevy small blocks, passing knowledge and passion from father to son. The 350's legacy lives in every LS-swapped vehicle, every small block hot rod, and every backyard mechanic who learned that building power didn't require wealth or factory connections, just a Chevy 350 and the determination to make it sing. That's not just an engine's legacy. That's cultural impact that will outlive us all. The engine that powered 4 generations of dreams. The Chevy 350 didn't just move cars, it moved America. What's your 350 story? Share your builds, your memories, your horsepower below. Subscribe for more legends that refuse to die. An engine so violent that experienced drag racers nicknamed it the Widowmaker, not out of respect, but genuine fear. The Chevrolet 409 wasn't just powerful, it was unpredictable, savage, and capable of catastrophic self-destruction without warning. Between 1961 and 1965, this temperamental W-Series big block became both the most celebrated and most cursed engine in American performance, immortalized in song while literally tearing itself apart on drag strips nationwide. The Beach Boys sang about their real fine 409, but they never mentioned the scattered connecting rods, cracked blocks, or twisted crankshafts that made this engine infamous among those who actually raced them. With its distinctive W-shaped combustion chambers and fearsome 409 horsepower in dual quad configuration, it represented Chevrolet's desperate attempt to dominate superstock drag racing. Consequences be damned. But here's what makes the 409 truly fascinating. This flawed monster actually worked, setting records and winning championships despite its murderous reputation. It proved that sometimes in racing, controlled chaos beats refined engineering. How did an engine so fundamentally compromised become a legend? Historical context and development. The 409 story begins with panic in General Motors' executive suites. In 1960, Ford was dominating NASCAR with their new 360-horsepower 352 FE engine, while Chrysler's wild 413 Max Wedge was destroying everything at drag strips. Chevrolet's ancient 348W series, originally designed as a truck engine, was being humiliated every weekend. Something had to be done, and quickly. Engineer Dick Keenath led the emergency program to extract more displacement from the existing W series architecture. The 348's unusual design, with its combustion chambers formed by the piston crown and wedge-shaped cylinder head surface, was never intended for high performance. It was meant for truck reliability with good low-end torque. But Chevrolet had no time to develop an entirely new engine. The solution was brutal simplicity. Bore the 348 out from 4.125 to 4.3125 inches, creating 409 cubic inches. This wasn't careful engineering, it was desperation. The bore increase left dangerously thin cylinder walls, But Chevrolet needed something for the 1961 model year. They'd worry about durability later. The first 409s arrived in December 1960 as 360 horsepower single four-barrel engines. But racers immediately discovered the engine's violent personality. The W-shaped combustion chambers created bizarre flame propagation patterns. The offset valves caused uneven port velocities. The sharp edges in the combustion chambers became hotspots that triggered pre-ignition. This wasn't just a powerful engine, it was barely contained explosion. By mid-1961, Chevrolet released the infamous dual-quad 409 horsepower version that gave the engine its name. This wasn't coincidence. Marketing demanded that the 409 make exactly 409 horsepower. Engineers achieved this through aggressive camshaft timing, 11-to-1 compression, and dual Carter AFB carburetors that dumped massive quantities of fuel into those strange W-shaped chambers. The Golden Age. The 409's brief reign from 1962 to 1964 was marked by spectacular victories and equally spectacular failures. At the 1962 NHRA Winter Nationals, Don Nicholson's 409-powered Impala shocked the racing world by running 12.84 seconds at 113 miles per hour, numbers that destroyed the competition. But 2 runs later, the engine scattered across the track, embedding connecting rod fragments in the catch fence. This became the 409's signature. Incredible performance punctuated by catastrophic failure. Old reliable Dave Strickler became the master of keeping 409s alive just long enough to win, developing techniques like deliberately short shifting to avoid the critical 5,800 to 6,200 RPM death zone, where 409s spontaneously ventilated their blocks. The Beach Boys' hit 409 in 1962 transformed the engine from drag strip terror to cultural phenomenon. Suddenly, every teenager wanted a 409, unaware that the engines destroying records on Sunday were rebuilt on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. The song's 4-speed dual-quad positraction combination became the recipe for street racing dominance, even if survival was questionable. In superstock racing, the 409 was unbeatable when it held together. Hayden Proffitt, Dino Don Nicholson, and Bill Grumpy Jenkins extracted mind-bending performance through combinations of careful preparation and resigned acceptance that engines would expire. Jenkins famously said, "You don't tune a 409, you negotiate with it." The Z11 variant of 1963 represented the 409's ultimate evolution. With 13.5-to-1 compression, wild solid lifter camshaft, and weight-saving aluminum front-end components, these factory race cars ran deep into the 11-second range. Only 57 were built, and fewer survived their racing careers intact. Each one carried the potential for both glory and catastrophe in equal measure. Technical brilliance. The 409's engineering was equal parts innovation and insanity. Those W-shaped combustion chambers that caused such trouble were actually an elegant solution to a packaging problem. They allowed larger valves than conventional wedge heads while maintaining compact external dimensions. The problem was that nobody fully understood combustion dynamics in such unusual chambers. The valve arrangement was particularly clever and problematic. The intake valves were offset toward the intake manifold, while exhausts tilted toward the outside. This created excellent port angles for flow, but caused violent turbulence in the combustion chambers. At high RPM, the mixture would actually reverse flow momentarily, causing the spectacular backfires that became the 409's calling card. The bottom end was massively overbuilt when it stayed together. The forged steel crankshaft was strong enough for 600 horsepower, but the 2-bolt main caps couldn't contain the forces generated by the 409's violent combustion events. The connecting rods were adequate until harmonics at certain RPMs caused them to literally dance themselves to destruction. Chevrolet's solution to these problems was more power through more compression. The progression from 10 to 1 to 11 to 1 to 13.5 to 1 compression ratios was less about performance gains and more about staying ahead of the failure curve. Higher compression meant more power at lower RPM, keeping engines below the deadly resonance zones where they self-destructed. The dual quad intake manifold was an exercise in controlled chaos. Two Carter AFB 4-barrels dumped fuel through passages that were too short for proper mixture preparation, but perfect for raw volume. The result was incredible power, with fuel distribution so uneven that cylinders ran different air-fuel ratios. Number 7 cylinder was notorious for running lean and burning pistons, while number 3 ran so rich it washed oil from the cylinder walls. Challenges rise. By late 1963, the 409's fundamental flaws were becoming impossible to ignore. NASCAR teams were going through 3 engines per race weekend. Drag racers budgeted for complete rebuilds every 10 passes. Street enthusiasts discovered their Sunday punch. 409s needed Monday morning surgery with alarming regularity. The biggest problem was the engine's narrow survival window. Below 5,500 RPM, the 409 was controllable if brutal. Above 6,200 RPM, it became a grenade with unpredictable detonation characteristics. But maximum power arrived at 6,000 RPM, right in the middle of the danger zone. Racers had to decide, shift early and lose, or risk everything for victory. Insurance companies began refusing coverage for 409-equipped vehicles after actuarial data revealed their alarming failure rates. Warranty claims bankrupted several dealerships who couldn't explain to customers why their legendary 409s scattered across highways. The dual-quad version was quietly discontinued from regular production, available only through careful special ordering. Competition was evolving beyond the 409's crude power delivery. Ford's new 427 SOHC engine made similar power with far better reliability. Chrysler's second-generation 426 Hemi was virtually indestructible while producing more horsepower. The 409's W-Series architecture, never intended for racing, had reached its absolute limit. Internal politics at General Motors sealed the 409's fate. The new Mark IV big block, later called the 396/427, was already in development with proper performance-oriented architecture. GM executives saw no reason to continue developing an engine that was literally destroying itself and Chevrolet's racing reputation simultaneously. The transition, the 409's death was swift and merciful. The 1965 model year saw limited production, mostly for customers who specifically demanded the legendary engine despite its reputation. By February 1965, the last 409 rolled off the assembly line, replaced immediately by the new 396 Mark IV big block that shared nothing with the problematic W series. The transition revealed just how compromised the 409 had been. The new 396 made similar power with none of the 409's violent characteristics. It revved freely to 7,000 RPM without exploding, distributed fuel evenly to all cylinders, and could survive entire racing seasons without major rebuilds. Everything the 409 wasn't, the 396 was. Many 409 owners immediately swapped to 396, grateful for engines that didn't require constant negotiation to avoid destruction. Others, particularly in superstock classes, where the 409 remained legal, continued campaigning the widowmakers with increasingly sophisticated and expensive modifications to ensure survival. The aftermarket largely abandoned the 409, focusing development on the superior Mark IV architecture. Within 2 years, performance parts for 409s became scarce as manufacturers saw no future in supporting an orphaned engine. The few specialists who continued 409 development charged premium prices for the expertise required to make them survive. Junkyards filled with destroyed 409 cores, cracked blocks, windowed cases, and twisted crankshafts. The engines that had been so valuable just years earlier became scrap metal. The Beach Boys' real fine 409 became a real dead 409 in countless salvage yards across America. Legacy and modern reality. Today, the 409 occupies a unique position in automotive history, simultaneously celebrated and notorious, valuable and problematic. Restored 409s command enormous prices, not despite their reputation, but because of it. Collectors pay premiums for documented Z11 engines, knowing they're acquiring barely controlled chaos that shaped drag racing history. The modern 409 restoration scene is split between purists maintaining original specifications and builders incorporating modern solutions to period problems. Aftermarket blocks with thicker cylinder walls, billet main caps, and improved oiling systems transform 409s from widowmakers to reliable performers. It only took 60 years to fix what Chevrolet couldn't in 5. Contemporary engine builders have finally decoded the 409's mysteries. Computer modeling reveals why those W-shaped chambers created such violent combustion. Modern camshaft profiles avoid the harmonic frequencies that destroyed original engines. Electronic fuel injection solves the distribution problems that plagued dual-quad setups. The Widowmaker has been tamed, mostly. But some enthusiasts deliberately maintain 409s in their original dangerous configuration. They argue the engine's violent personality is integral to its character. These owners accept that every full-throttle run might be the last, that success is measured in survival as much as elapsed times. They're preserving not just an engine, but an attitude toward performance that modern reliability has rendered extinct. The 409's greatest legacy might be what it taught General Motors about rushing performance development. The Mark IV big block that replaced it incorporated every lesson learned from the 409's failures. Modern GM performance engines undergo extensive durability testing that would have saved the 409's reputation. The Widowmaker died, so future engines could live. The 409 proved that legends aren't always built on excellence. Sometimes they're forged from spectacular failure, violent unpredictability, and the courage to campaign engines that actively tried to destroy themselves. In our age of warranty-backed 1,000-horsepower supercars, when's the last time an engine scared you? Share your 409 stories below, especially the ones that ended badly, and subscribe for more tales of engines that bit back.